So our agenda today, we'll do some introductions around the room, and then I'll introduce Dr. Zyromski here, and then we'll spend some time together learning about evidence-based school counseling. So if we could just do a quick whip around the room, if you would share your name, if you would share your agency or university or place of work affiliation, and then if there's any burning questions that you have for Dr. Z today. We know we took a solicitation on that survey that we originally sent out for registration, but if there's anything new that has been kicked up for you in anticipation of this morning's session, you're totally invited to share any specific pieces you want to get out of our time together. So whoever wants to jump in, by all means, we'll do a quick whip and then I'll introduce Dr. Z.
I'll jump in. Feel free, go.
PJ Wanger, I'm with the Northeast MHTTC.
Amazing, thank you.
I'll jump in next. Or not, I'll let Violetta go for it.
Hi, I'm Violetta. I am a doctoral student at Oregon State in my first year, and I'm a school counselor in the Clark County School District, which is located in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Hi, my name is Gretchen Schultes. Alongside with Gideon, I am one of the CRLL stewards. I currently work at the community college level here in New Jersey. So.
Hi, I'm Beth Gilfillan. I'm in my first year as a school counselor educator at Bowling Green State University. One of the things that I'm hoping to get out of this is some ideas on how to teach evidence-based school counseling practices and get students excited about it too, because I'm finding some challenges with that as I've started this new part of my career.
Hi, I'm Allison Leatherman. I am a first-year doctoral student at Oregon State University, and I am a high school counselor in a suburb of Portland, Oregon, and I am in my 14th year as a professional school counselor.
Whoever's next. Dr. Chan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Chan. I'm from Malaysia. This is my first time joining this meeting, and I'm actually a fresh grad. I have worked 10 months in school, so I'm here today to learn from you guys.
Amazing.
I'm a primary school counselor. Thank you.
Fantastic. And PJ, did you want to jump in? Looks like you're not yet over video, but do you want to introduce yourself?
I did introduce myself.
Oh, PJ
Wanger, I'm with the Northeast MHTTC.
Amazing.
And my video's not on because I'm driving.
Oh, geez. Okay, be safe. This will be like a live podcast for you. All right, thanks for those introductions. Let me just introduce Dr. Z here, and then I'll hand the floor over to him. Dr. Brett Zyromski is assistant professor in the Department of Educational Studies at The Ohio State University. His scholarship focuses on the impact of evidence-based interventions in school counseling, evidence-based school counselor education, and evaluation in school counseling. Dr. Zyromski is co-author of Facilitating Evidence-Based Data-Driven School Counseling, a manual for practice, which was published by Corwin in 2016. And he's also the co-founder and co-chair of the National Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference. Dr. Zyromski is involved with the American School Counselor Association as a lead recognized ASCA model program reviewer, and has also served as a trainer of the ASCA National Model for ASCA. He has successfully helped over 20 schools earn RAMP over the last 5 years, and Dr. Zyromski has served as a project manager for over $5 million worth of federal and state grants. 5 elementary and secondary school counseling grants were received by Campbell County Schools and many other schools that I won't mention here because they're included in his bio. We're really excited to have Dr. Z here today. So a warm welcome to you, and feel free to take it away.
Excellent, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I was so excited and honored and humbled when Gideon emailed, and it's been a true pleasure to work with both Gideon and Gretchen, just preparing for this conversation that we're going to have around evidence-based school counseling, as well as I think the professional advocacy and leadership actually came out of that conversation with Gideon and Gretchen, and so I'm excited to touch on those as well, and to me they're kind of interrelated. So thank you for showing up this morning, and I know for many of you it's early morning, for other people it's probably late at night, and other people it's all sorts of, you know, noonish. So thanks for taking some time out for this, and I look forward to hearing your perspectives, and I think as school counselors, that's clearly, school counselors are really where we started the evidence-based school counseling conference to serve school counselors and to be led by school counselors, and so that's kind of near and dear to our hearts. And then school counselor education, we published an article on school counselor preparing future school counselors using an evidence-based kind of framework, and the Professional School Counseling Journal, I believe that was last year in 2018, maybe it was 19. And I'm hoping that we have a special issue. We not hope, but we have a special issue of the Professional School Counseling Journal coming out in 2020, early 2020, around evidence-based school counseling. And I'm hoping that one of the articles in there will be another thing around school counseling preparation. So there's more resources coming on that end of things as well. We can talk about that later. But so as we go through, I'm hoping that we talk about the 4 things that were listed on clearly that you saw on the website that hopefully brought you to this conversation. They're going to interweave with each other, so it's not necessarily going to be, you know, one to the next, to the next, to the next, because I think as we talk about factors involved in research and how we do research, that naturally kind of has an interplay with advocacy and leadership and what we think is important and where we're putting our time, and also our own feelings around what we need to develop our own skills in order to do what we need to do for the profession, I think, in students. So that kind of goes into reflective strategy leadership. So as I go through, you're going to notice, you know, we're not going to go in one bullet to the next bullet to the next bullet to the next bullet, but we'll kind of interweave things throughout the conversation. I could probably talk about these things for, you know, all day. So I'm going to try to make sure that I stop and we have enough time to have a rich discussion and a deep discussion around these things. So I may speed up or slow down depending on your feedback and what you type in the chat box, your facial expressions if somebody falls asleep, things like that. You know, I'll speed up or slow down. Some of the content of this was created in collaboration or simply by Dr. Carrie Dimmitt. And Dr. Carrie Dimmitt is a longtime friend and collaborator. She's at University of Massachusetts Amherst. She's the director of the Ronald H. Frederickson Center for School Counseling, Outcome Research, and Evaluation. Truly, I know that somebody wrote in earlier, they were looking for actual evidence-based interventions. They wanted a list of those things. We do have those. That's not what I'm going to touch on today, simply because it wasn't, that's a 2-hour session on its own. And so if you want that resource, I'm happy to email that out. So that would be something that you'd want to communicate to Gideon. Maybe we can compile then an email list of people that would like an organized list of evidence-based interventions, and I'm happy to send that out. That's no problem at all. So the national expert, probably the international expert in school-based evidence-based interventions is truly Carrie Dimmitt, in the sense that I, of course, know them and love them, but she is able to recite them and talk about all the research around them and all sorts of things on a whole nother level. And so her work is so important in that area and many other areas, but in that area. And so I want to make sure that she is credited for all the work that she's put into that. So as I think about school counseling research, and this is different than school-based research or school-based counseling. So when we think about, or when I think about work internationally, because there's been work done all over the world by many people, Jay Carey is leading some work around school counseling policy internationally, doing a lot of work internationally, and that's all school-based counseling and not school counseling. So there's the way we use words matters. And so I just want to kind of differentiate that we're really talking about American school counseling research when we're talking today. And I think one of the things that continues to drive the conversation is this professional identity of school counselors. Are we educators, or are we mental health experts? And that will actually drive research. That will drive the focus of people's area of interest. Personally, I think that we're both. So for me, that's actually a very important conversation to have, because if we're both, it means that we're the front line of mental health. It means that when kids are struggling, and we know completing suicide is the second leading cause of death for adolescents. So if that is the second leading cause of death for adolescents, and non-suicidal self-injury, 1 in 10 males, and I think 1 in 4 or 5 females now are engaging in NSSIs. And we also know that anxiety is on the increase, and so is major depressive episodes. If we have all these mental health issues that our kids are facing, for me, it definitely establishes our need to be frontline. And it also then focuses what do I need to focus my work on. And so a different line of research that we're doing is we're starting to really look at average child experiences. That's been something that the medical field and other fields have been looking at for 20 years or longer, and counseling and school counseling, we're getting on that arc now, and we look at it in a similar lens, I think, and this is totally conjecture on my part, in a similar lens as we look at trauma-informed care, trauma-informed schools, and so there's a lot of potential for kind of teasing out all those things. And so that one line, what are we, educators and mental health experts, dictates where we spend our time and how we spend our time, and where we invest our money and how we research and what are we looking at. And so for me, to me, the major question we have is what's best for our kids and what do our kids need? And it seems to me if we're not frontline mental health experts in schools, who are? And who's going to be taking that role? And are we willing to give up that role? Is that something that we're willing to do? And that role is reflected, quite honestly, in the priorities of our professional organizations. So if you look at the American School Counselors Association national model, you'll see very little around mental health expertise. There is statements around being mental health experts and frontline people, but it's definitely not integrated throughout there. And that's something that is a conversation, an ongoing conversation. And I think that also speaks to the way that our professional organizations, whether it's American School Counselors Association or our state associations or KCREP, our Council for Accreditation of Counseling-Related Educational Programs, or National Accrediting Agency, these are supposed to reflect us. I think these are organizations that are supposed to serve us and reflect us, not necessarily define us, if that makes sense. And so I think it's one of our roles as researchers is to disseminate what we know actually works, what we know is actually best for kids, what the research says that. Oftentimes when I'm going to schools and I talk about, tell me what's going on, one of the phrases that I use I stole it from somebody else, is if this conversation isn't grounded in data, it's your opinion, and I already have one of those. And so I'd love to hear what your data says. I'd love to hear what the research says kids need. And so the research and the data, the national statistics, they say that kids need 2 or more adults that care about them. They need a place where they feel safe at home. They need an adult in the house that they feel safe with. They need other things at school where they are able to feel like they're safe to grow and increase their own resilience. So those are places that I want to invest my time in, because that's what the research says is important. So as we're thinking about the goals of kids and our counseling goals, for me, that second bullet transitions into that very first question, which we could literally probably spend our entire time discussing, which is, what's the goal of education in schools? So how we define this will be how we spend our money and how we create policy. If the goal is achievement on high stakes testing, then the outcome will be a school system that tries to create everybody that looks the same and can score the same on tests. If that is where we're going, then you're going to see creativity decrease. You're going to see despair increase. You're going to see anxiety increase. So clearly, I don't feel like that's our goal. I think that if our goal is for healthy, functioning, creative adults that contribute to a positive life and culture, then we look at non-cognitives, and we look at hope, we look at engagement, we look at well-being, we look at other things that research shows are better predictors of post-secondary success, for example, than ACT scores or SAT scores, which hope is. So things like that, I think, are more of priorities for my research agenda, because the research shows already that they're important. So I guess the message for this slide and for the research and professional advocacy is, if we're advocating for what's best for kids, that could then and should then inform what we're studying as a profession. And I'm not sure that that's actually happening. So that can be a place for a conversation to start post-presentation. We can return to this. I'd love to hear your opinions. So one of the issues that we see in school counseling research, and as doctoral students, either if you're entering the doctoral studies or you're getting towards your dissertations and leaving the doctoral studies, as you do your research, you're going to come across a lot of navel gazing. So you'll see a lot of, this is who we are as counselors, and this is what we look like as counselors, and this is what we need as counselors. And a lot of times it's because the research is quite bluntly easier to conduct and easier to get done in a year to get your doctorate and get out. Also, I think there is, and I'm not sure if I talk about this in the next slide, I talk about it a little bit later. We'll come back to it. There is a gap in expertise. So for example, for me, the Ohio State University is my third university that I've taught at. This is my 13th year as a faculty member. And I've spent, I would say, out of those 13 years, the whole time trying to establish or increase, not establish, but just increase and gain additional skills so that I can conduct the research that I would want to research, that I want to implement, to find out what works in counseling, to find out what helps kids, to find out what they need. Your doc program is a jumping off point for that. Some people are incredibly good at it. Dr. Matthew Lemberger, I think, is one of our foremost school-based researchers. He's amazing at that work. I am continually growing in that area. And so how I choose to invest my classes in my doc program, what do I choose? When I was in my doc program, I chose not to take additional statistics courses. I chose not to take additional methodology courses. And my entire career since then has been less for it. And I've spent a lot of time trying to make up for it. And so I think instead of navel gazing, we're going to get into what the profession, I think the profession needs. And of course, I'm going to tell you that based on research. And then one way that I think about that is, what do I need to gain as far as research skills personally to conduct this research? And that is part of what kind of created selfishly the research day with the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference. There's a research day that precedes the conference. And again, that was created by Laura Owen and Jeff Warren, who were on the ACES School Counseling Interest Network Research Committee. And the very first research day was created by those two. And then we've continued to evolve it. And again, mostly because we wanted to make sure that people could gain the skills they needed to do the research that a profession needs. So we'll get into that a little bit later as well. But I just want to point out, as we continue to look at the research, my hope is that we stop navel gazing and we do some research that takes more time. And part of that is on school counselor education programs. It's on us, it's on Oregon State, it's on Ohio State, it's on wherever we are, in the sense that it requires the faculty to be incredibly planful. So if I have doc students coming into Ohio State next year, which I will, and I hope that they do school-based research for their dissertations in 3 years, which I do, I actually need to have the systems in place for that to occur, because it's really unfair, almost impossible to ask a doc student to create functional relationships with school districts, with schools, to tease out an environment in which they're going to be able to look at some sort of school-based research, school counseling research. So that requires a lot more planfulness on my part and a lot more collaborative relationships with area school districts or school districts around the country to create environments in which my doc students can do their research in partnership with school counselors and with schools with the minimum of stress on their part. So what do we need? We need research around what works for kids, and we don't have that. So Kat Griffith, who's now at San Diego, there was a team of Kat Griffith, Melissa Mariani, who's at Florida Atlantic University, George McMahon, and myself. And that team did two content analysis studies. The first one was actually a content analysis of college and career readiness and interventions, and we'll get to that in the next slide. And the second study was this study here, which was a 10-year content analysis of ASCA and ACA affiliated journals. And what you see is it's not a lot. There were not a lot of intervention evaluation studies published, and the ones that were tended to be, for example, I published an article last year, which was an attempt to look at the True Goals study. And we started off with a randomized control design, and then the functional struggles of doing school research in schools reared their heads, and we ended up with a pre-post single group design. Exactly what you see on the screen is what we published. And so that kind of illustrates the difficulty of doing research in schools. We started out with this really strong design. It would have met the What Works Clearinghouse expectations for evidence. And by the time we got done with the training with school counselors and the implementation fidelity stuff and everything else, we had lost our control group, and we had lost all these other things. And we ended up with this less stringent design. And so I think that there are some challenges, and we're experiencing these challenges, and the result is we have very little, in the context of 10 years, very little research that is intervention evaluation research. That also then aligns with all Ray's study in 2011 and authors that intervention research accounted for only 6% of ACA affiliated journal article publications total, and then our follow-up showed that intervention evaluation was far less than that. So that kind of just illustrates we need intervention evaluation research. When I say intervention evaluation research, it really is research that is looking at the impact of something. So it differs a little bit from program evaluation research, a little bit from outcome research, which can include meta-analysis. It can include state-level data analysis. And so it really is a specific statement. When we say intervention evaluation research, we're really saying we want to know what's been done with kids and if it works in school counseling. And we don't have a lot of research around that. So that first study that I mentioned is the McMahon et al. 2017, and that showed that there were 0 school counseling articles related to college readiness, intervention, evaluation, ASCA or ACA affiliated journals ever. And so that seems like that's an issue. So we need more research around what's effective with kids to help them be successful in post-secondary, help them be successful in meeting college and career readiness standards. And so that is kind of 2 articles that illustrate what needs, and then a third what we need, and then a third approach for looking at what we need in a profession is our Delphi studies. And Delphi studies kind of show themes or questions around what the experts in the field say are the needs. And so this is actually a follow-up study. I think it was I can't remember the year of the first one, maybe 2005, but don't quote me. But the first Delphi study and the second Delphi study, there was actually an evolution. I should have presented this to you, but the evolution over a decade is very interesting. But these are the first 3 rankings. So of 174 questions or topics, 174 possibilities, the number 1 ranked concern by these experts in the field were school counseling interventions. I'm not in love necessarily with students' academic development and achievement, but if you put 1 and 3 together, then for me, it's intervention studies that were looking at the holistic success of students. And between 1 and 3, we're really looking at everything that relates to student success besides college and career readiness. There is emerging, I can't quote off the top of my head, there is emerging concern or question if the total focus on college and career, again, is dampening student creativity. We know that the focus on academic achievement exclusively will reduce students' creativity, and conformity will reduce creativity. And so there is an issue with that. If we think that creativity is important and flexibility, if we think that Steve Jobs and these creative thinkers are the type of people we want to create, then this zoned in focus on standardized testing will be detrimental to that. And then the number two ranked concern is assessing the impact of implementing comprehensive school counseling programs. So the 3 major research areas all kind of related to assessing intervention or assessing the impacts of interventions on kids. And so that kind of drives where I'm spending my time and how I'm spending my time. And again, this is despite the fact that I did not feel equipped for this. Even though I don't feel equipped for it, it's my responsibility to become equipped. And I think that's one of the things that we see out of amazing school counselors. That's one of the things that I admire when I go around the country doing workshops with school counselors, is I just admire these school counselors that talk about the PD that they go to, and they're becoming trauma informed, and they're doing all this PD around building their skills to help the kids that need them. And so I challenge school counselor educators and scholars to do the same thing. It's like, what do we need? What are the skills that we need outside of our comfort areas to develop the research that we need to advance the profession? This relates to this issue. Counselor education programs that are preparing strong scholars. Over the last 20 years, and even now, KCREP has a requirement, or is calling for a requirement, not yet a requirement, but it's calling for the idea that all of our counselor education professors have graduated from KCREP accredited counselor education preparation programs. I have differing thoughts about that. I think it's great. I think it's, in some senses it's great, and then it has some weaknesses. And here is one of the major weaknesses. People like Chris Sink and Terry Dimmitt did not graduate from counselor education programs. These are major scholars in our field. And it's not true just for them. These are just 2 examples. And we see this in other areas too. Trish Hatch has educational leadership doctorate. So we see people that are leaders in our field in different areas, not in research necessarily, but in advocacy and systemic change. I would say Trish is the leader, and Chris Sink and Carrie Dimmer are leaders in research and scholarship. And these people aren't counselor education doctorates. And so if we are going to go the way KCREP is suggesting, if we are going to say that all of our faculty need to be graduated from KCREP accredited programs, all that simply means is that our KCREP accredited counselor education programs need to become rigorous in scholarship, rigorous in research. If we are going to prepare people, then they need to be outstanding. There are programs that do that in outstanding ways. Central Florida, in my opinion, produces amazing scholars. They do a great job of that. So I'm not saying we can't do that. It's just as a call for the profession to do that and to recognize and be honest and transparent about where some of our leaders came from in the past, not necessarily counselor education programs. And so if educational psych and counseling psych created better researchers and scholars in the past, what do we need to do as a profession to become that strong? Another issue is that some of our strongest researchers, Cheryl Holcomb-McCoy, for example, Glenn Lambie, they get called into leadership in their universities. And so they move into leadership positions and then are doing less research and less scholarship. And so it's great because they're impacting more students and they're bringing their amazing perspective into preparing the next generation of students across the universities. And we lose something too from our profession when these amazing researchers and scholars move into administrative positions. So I think what this really is calling for is just a thoughtful conversation around preparation. How do we prepare the next generation of scholars? How do we, and this also has implications for school counseling, how do we produce school counselors who understand the need for scholarship? I'm not asking you to do it, I'm asking you to collaborate with somebody else who does it. And so there is action research, of course, and ways for school counselors to do research. A lot of people talk about single subject. I know Gene Eakin is great at single subject at Oregon State. And so people talk about single subject case design, they talk about action research, and that's great if you have the time and you have the ability. School counselors are doing so much that, in my opinion, this should really, the responsibility for this should really fall on the scholars in our field. Creating great, strong relationships that return the research to the schools, that serve the students, not our own research priorities, in the sense that we know what the students need, and we can work with school counselors to find out what the students at their school needs. And I guarantee what their students need at that school will align with what the profession needs with research. And so we can do that kind of collaboration. We can come back to this slide too. People have questions or thoughts about that. So it kind of moves back to this question. The second bullet point, no matter where it leads us, and do we yet have that research? There was a special edition in 2012 of Professional School Counseling Journal, 6-state study that was done by Jay Carey, Carrie Dimmitt, Karen Harrington, Ian Martin. There was some other, there are other authors as well that I'm sure, Rich LePan, Rich LePan's another amazing researcher in our field who didn't have a counselor education doctorate. So Rich LePan, you'll find his name over all sorts of important research, and again, was impaired by a counselor education program. But anyways, this 6-state study, a special issue, December of 2012, was a 6-state study. It's basically an outcome study. It looked at the impact of different things and the correlates of those things with achievement. So they looked at, for example, being data-driven. They found that was very important. They looked at delivering school counseling through a differentiated delivery system. So that's a tiered delivery system, doing different things, not just one shot at one level. They found that that was really important. When I say really important, it means that it related to either graduation rates with technical programs, or academic achievement in math and reading, or reductions in behavior referrals, or increases in attendance, the things that are usually primary drivers of our conversations as far as data outcomes. And so there's that research that shows what we should be doing with kids. The research shows we should be data-driven. The research shows that we should be delivering at differentiated delivery systems. That research is there already. So are we doing that? And is that what's driving the program instead of my opinion? And so when I say that on a professional level too. Are we able to have conversations about what works for kids, not just what we want personally? And I think that sometimes creates complicated and politically loaded conversations that we need to be having. And we may get to this in another slide, so I may repeat myself, but I think it's really important then that our professional journals are publishing things. For example, we, at the conference, Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference, we have had sessions proposed that are anti-evidence-based school counseling, or at least very critical of it in some way. And we definitely invite those, and we give them rooms, and we give them space, and we put them in equal, and those are blind peer reviewed. Everything is blind peer reviewed. And we're not going to cut something out because it doesn't fit with what we think is our vision for the conference. And I hope that it's a model for how things are run in other conferences and with professional journals. No, I believe it's unethical for a professional journal or for a conference to not publish something or give space to something because it's anti their vision or anti their mission. And I'm not sure that professional discourse is welcomed in every area of our profession, with every association, our profession. And so I would throw that out there kind of as a concern, as a major concern, an ethical concern, that we as professionals and as school counselors, that we don't just follow along, that we ask evidence-based school counseling conference, you know, how many sessions are you, what's your acceptance rate? What are you, is it truly a blind peer-reviewed process? Tell us about that blind peer-reviewed process. What are you publishing in the special issue? What are you allowing to be discussed at the conference? How do you determine that? Does it have to align with your mission as far as pro evidence-based school counseling? And I differentiate that between, if you look at our website, which we'll get to later, you'll see the purpose and mission of evidence-based school counseling. If somebody submits something that is totally off mission or vision, then we're not going to have it there because it doesn't fit our niche. But if it's critical of us, or if it's an argument against or things like that, you know, welcome, that'd be great. Because I think the bottom point is the most important point. What are we doing that impacts kids? What are we doing that creates positive outcomes for kids? And I say that very generally. I don't limit that to academic achievement at all, clearly, especially underrepresented populations. How are we closing equity gaps? How are we increasing access and opportunity? How are we changing systems and changing the discourse around what we're doing for kids that are normally left behind? One of the ways that George McMahon talks about this is in the industrial model of education, which is our factory model of education. George McMahon does a great job of explaining ecological counseling and how we need to take consideration of all kids. But if you look at a factory model of education, or that approach which we used at the turn of the century, it was to conform and create a standardization of products, right, so that people could go work in factories. And one of the byproducts, one of the natural required byproducts of that is waste. So if you have a factory model of education, who's the waste? And so that's an issue. That is a problem. And so how we approach education matters. So this all kind of drove the creation of the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference. And so for me, this is something that it's all volunteer based. And so for me, this is definitely a passion area. There's nobody we don't have a director of this, and this is all shared leadership. And so our passion is a shared vision with many voices. So we want voices that are bringing critical discourse in. We want to create this discourse. We don't think necessarily that we have to have one voice, and that's the only thing that we're doing. We think it's much more powerful to have a diverse set of voices and come around a vision through that discourse. We think it's important to really follow transformational leadership tenets. And I'm really just learning these tenets of transformational leadership. But as I read them, I realize this is what we really have been hoping for and trying for. And we'll talk about that later. So as I talk about transformational leadership, I'm not the expert in that at all. I'm more like a follower. And so Colette Dollarhide and Anita Young, and there's another author, and I apologize to her for forgetting her name here on the fly, who are the leaders of that, and I'm learning from them. I think we need to emphasize what works for our students, and that is really how the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference evolved, is just, you know, whether it's I don't care if it is something that aligns with what you like or you don't like. Does it work for kids? And so when I go around and do workshops and trainings, when people that are intervening with kids say, well, I do this because I really like it. That doesn't matter to me. I'm glad that you like it. I love it that you like it. So I guess in some sense it does matter to me, but only in the extent that you're enthusiastic about the outcomes that you're tracking on kids, that it actually matters, it changes their lives. That to me makes a much bigger difference than if it's something that you can get behind. If there's an evidence-based intervention that I don't really like that much, and then kids are going to tell that I don't really like it, then it's not going to work. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you go into something saying I either like it or I don't like it, that's going to be true of your results. So we need to kind of get over the mindset of, am I going to like this? Am I not going to like it? And instead get the mindset of, what makes this work? What can I get behind? What can I get enthusiastic about? Because it's shown that it's worked with other populations and different populations around the country. So how can I get behind that so that my kids benefit, and how will I know that they benefit? We wanted to really empower school counselors with the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference, and we wanted to make sure that we share out what works with other people. So it was founded in 2013. It actually was created in 2012. It was like a conversation in late 2012, and then we had the very first one in, I believe, March of 2013. So we threw it together in like 3 or 4 months. In that conversation in late 2012, it was basically an early morning for me, and people that know me know that I don't do early mornings. And so my brain had been functioning on its own without me. By the time I got into the office in that early morning, my brain had told me that my school counselors in the region, which I was at Northern Kentucky University at that point, which is near Cincinnati, across the river from Cincinnati. So there's a few million people in the region. Our school counselors were amazing school counselors in that region, but they need to be equipped. And we weren't doing a great enough job in getting them what they needed to be equipped to help students. They wanted it. They wanted to know what works. They wanted to know the interventions. They wanted to know how to evaluate. They wanted to know how to make data-driven decisions, but they didn't know how. And so how are we going to do that? So I simply called up Jay Carey on the phone, and he was gracious and answered it, and then said, "You should talk to Carrie Dimmitt." And the three of us talked, and then Jen Stansbury Koenig at Northern Kentucky University at the time was the interim director for the Center for Educator Excellence. And they had been doing job-alike networks in the region already. And so they had been bringing school superintendents together and principals together and school social workers together and school counselors together. And they'd been doing these job-alike networks. And so we simply plugged in with Jen and Jay and Carrie and the people at the Center for School Counseling and Outcome Research and Evaluation. They've been doing institutes around the country for a decade before that around evidence-based school counseling. It had just been like institutes trainings for small groups here and there around the country, but they had already been established in this type of mindset and thought for a long time. And so it was really my fortune to plug into these kind of leading experts and minds in the field, and their graciousness to welcome me in to what they were doing. And then we had the infrastructure through Jen to already have access to all of the school counselors that we've been working with. And in my first year at Northern Kentucky University, I visited over 77 schools. So I made it kind of a mission to get out into the schools wherever I was doing my work as a faculty member to create those relationships. And by the way, that was how I got my school counselors in training excited about evidence-based school counseling. Is all my assignments, everything I created was school-based. It was all in collaboration with school counselors because I had relationships with all those school counselors. And so I was able to create collaborative partnerships where my students would go out and they would, in one semester, they would do a needs assessment. They would create SMART goals. This is all in collaboration with school counselors, kind of led by school counselors, but they would create SMART goals. They would collect and analyze needs assessments. They would create the results of that. They would organize the existing school counseling program in a visual. They would create kind of a model program. The next semester, they would analyze, again with school counselors in the area, they would analyze some interventions that they were doing and create graphs of the outcomes and the results and share that back with the school. So in 1 year, they basically build a comprehensive school counseling program that's data-driven, using these assessments that analyze results, that look at evidence-based interventions and conduct analysis of those interventions. And you may not be able to implement that with like second year or third year master's students, but if you catch students coming in, they don't know what they can and can't do. And so if you create an infrastructure of support and you're encouraging, you say, this is what we do here, they will jump through, fight through walls for you, because if you make it about what's best for kids. And so my students at Northern Kentucky University were incredible with that. And as they were at Southern Illinois University, I learned a lot from my students at Southern Illinois University. And they taught me about how to create and structure and organize classes to facilitate and support incredibly high achieving master students, and how to challenge them that way. And so I've learned a lot from my students over the years, but what I've learned is really, really rigorous, high expectations for school-based work to conduct these kind of things. But anyways, that's a sidebar, but addresses a little bit about how I create excitement around these things. And then the other thing about the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference is it's always been student-led. So that's another way. If you came to the one at Ohio State last year, you would have noticed my students everywhere. And we have it at Ohio State in 2021. It'll be the same. You know, doc students will help lead it. But before I had doc students at NKU, when it was founded, it was all our Chi Sigma Iota and student leadership. And so we would have every student, every school counseling student in our program would be at the conference leading in some way, in some sort of manner. So, and so basically having our students realizing that they are doing things that not all school counselors do, but they're learning a transformative school counseling approach, and they're leaders in the field, sometimes will empower them and get them pretty excited. So as we continue, I'm going to speed up a little bit just for the sake of time, but as we built the school counseling conference, the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference, it was a very humbling experience, actually, because in late 2012, I emailed basically, and contacted 30 people in the field who had been doing the research in this area. And they were people some of them I had never met and had never had interaction with at all. Some of them had work that I didn't necessarily agree with, but it was informing and creating the conversations. And so to their credit, every single one of those people came out to that conference on their own dime that first year and built the advisory council and created an infrastructure of leadership for the Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference. It still is emotionally moving for me to think about the way that the profession just kind of came out for that type of leadership. I mean, we had an incredible response. And so, and people that couldn't necessarily make it that first year, you know, they tried to make it additional years, but it was really an impressive response. Now that I think about it, I want to edit this. Maybe not every single person said yes, but not every single person was possibly able to make that first conference. That's a slight edit, but every single person said yes. It was a pretty impressive response. From the very beginning, we've been non-political and non-affiliated, and that we hope drives a conversation forward that we can have kind of in between ASCA, ACA, and KCREP around what works for kids, because that's all we really care about. And so that's our mission forward. ASCA, ACA, KCREP, and College Board all had representatives. College Board's school counselor office kind of folded, so we don't have that yet. Be great to have that back, but we have the other representatives still on the advisory council, and they are incredibly supportive. They take an incredibly important role of informing us about what's going on in their associations and where they're headed, and they support. ASCA again has created this. They gave us access and have supported the special issue of the Professional School Counseling Journal, and the first one came out last year, early 2019, around the 2018 conference proceedings, and again we'll have one in early 2020 around the 2019 conference proceedings. And that's a significant support. And ACA and KCREP also in their own ways have created significant support for the efforts. And so it was really significant that they were there in the beginning, and then they've been there ever since then. So I've already mentioned how it was completely volunteer led. Our advisory council is limited to 30 people from around the country, and then they actually work on committees all year round, because originally it was really Jen and the Center for Educator Excellence that did a massive amount of work, unpaid work, to support us with the students helping, and then Carrie and Jay and I doing a massive amount of work throughout the year. And if anyone's at a Research One university or any other university, knowing that this type of service, how much time it eats, you're not getting credit for it. And so that was really just a labor of love. We did get some financial support from the Provost's office, the Dean and the Department Chair at NKU. They were always supportive at Northern Kentucky University throughout the process. The conference center, which no longer belongs to NKU, but at the time they were incredibly supportive for us in making us able to break even. We've never made money on the conference. It's literally not a money maker because it's entirely dependent on registration costs. And our registration costs are still lower than most state association conferences and way like half as much as national associations. So even though we still keep registration costs very low to try to make it possible for school counselors to attend, that is entirely what drives the ability to sustain this thing. Real quickly, it moves around the country because the advisory council asked for it to move around the country. In 2016, Pam Paisley and George McMahon at University of Georgia founded a kind of one-year Innovations in School Counselor Prep Conference and paired evidence-based with that. University of San Diego, Ian Martin hosted it in 2017. Carol DeHeer hosted it at the New York Institute of Technology. 2019, we hosted Ohio State University. So we save costs by hosting it at universities because we can get discounts on costs because we collaborate with Chi Sigma Iota and student organizations. Otherwise, we'd never be able to afford to run a conference. In 2020, it's going to be at Florida Atlantic University. Melissa Mariani and Liz Valaris are running that incredibly well, smoothly. We just had a meeting this week. And then it's back at Ohio State in 2021. I'd love for it to actually go to the Northwest in 2022. So if anybody wants to think about hosting it in the Northwest, give me an email. The Focus of Evidence-Based School Counseling Conference, if you open this link, you will see the focus. It's pretty streamlined. I'll let you all do that on your own because of time constraints at the moment. But if you click this link, it takes you straight to our website. You can explore that. You can see our advisory council. You can see our policies. You can see the focus of the conference and everything else you possibly could need. So this is evidence-based school counseling. I'm going to go through this very briefly. Hopefully I get now through the end in about 10 minutes. I'm happy to stay on, since we start around 12:10 my time, I'm happy to stay on a little bit later for our discussion if people are able to do that. If you're not, I totally understand that as well. But evidence-based school counseling is evolving. This is what was originally published in 2007 by Carrie Dimmitt, Jay Carey, and Trish Hatch. And so the three pieces of evidence-based school counseling is really, what's the issue? What do we know about the issue? And that is supposed to be defined by data. What do we know works? So if you're starting at the bottom, that's the problem description. What do we know is the issue? What's the data tell us is the issue? You move to the right. What's the outcome research say? What do we know works for this issue? And then how do we know it works? So that's intervention and program evaluation. And then that is the kind of the definition of evidence-based school counseling. We're looking, there you go. Thanks, Gideon. So when you think about evidence-based school counseling, you think about all these different parts of the conference these are kind of the focus areas. So we include RAMP in there, not because of affiliation with an association, but because it involves data-driven practices and evaluation. The pieces of RAMP that align with evidence-based school counseling are really the data-driven step, knowing what needs to be addressed, and the intervention and program evaluation. This knowing what works piece in evidence-based has been growing exponentially recently. ASCA has been asking people to show, is this a best practice or is this an evidence-based practice? How do you know this is working? One thing that we think about is the creation of evidence-based interventions is literally a time and costly effort. So if school counselors are doing things with kids, we're not saying stop what you're doing. We're saying, how do you know it works? So we're not asking all interventions to be evidence-based interventions. That's not really our mission. What we're saying is, think about this process of what needs to be addressed. How, what works already? Do you have something that you can get? So for example, Coping Cat or CAT project, both evidence-based interventions to work they're the same thing, to work with anxiety. One is anxiety for children, which is Coping Cat, and one is anxiety in adolescents, which is the CAT project. These are like $28 on Amazon. They're not expensive programs. And so if when I'm working in workshops around the country and I say, you know, how many of us have students that are really struggling with anxiety, and everybody raises their hands, then I ask them, how many of you have the CAT project or Coping Cat? And very few people raise their hands. For $28, that's an issue. And so you may, again, look at something to do with tier 2 or individual with Coping Cat or CAT project and be able to intervene really easily. And then how do you know it's working? How are you assessing that? And again, I love that. So these are just talking about the ethical standards are moving towards evidence-based practices and calling for evidence-based practices, both in ACA, ASCA, and then CACREP. And on the clinical mental health counseling side, people have been using evidence-based practice for a while. People talk about using, you know, DBT, for example, with students, with people diagnosed with personality disorders, because the research shows that it works, you know, and then we get into how we know things work. So CBT, easier to study, you know, easier to examine. One of the reasons there's so much more research around that. So we are talking about research around issues around research for the same reasons as well. Throw this slide in here for some clarification around terms. People will talk about, this is research informed. Well, what we're talking about with evidence-based practice, we have evidence that things are working. Evidence-based interventions are specific interventions that have met the rigorous standards of the What Works Clearinghouse. CASEL also has some standards. And so there are more and more of these. And then research-informed practices are important. For example, we know cross-age programming it works really well. We don't have an evidence-based intervention for that, but we know it works. So we want to help kids, and we have people on one campus having middle schoolers work with elementary kids, or having, you know, 12th graders work with 9th graders. We know research suggests that works really well, but we don't have a packaged program. That's fine. We just want to talk about those things. So that kind of clarity around terms is important. A quick little pet peeve is that people says we don't have any evidence-based intervention. That we get that a lot. People will say that to us, even at the conference, they'll say that. We actually have over 50, and CASEL has different guides. If you don't know what CASEL is, you can just check out casel.org. What Works Clearinghouse has a lot as well. And again, we can share out this presentation that I have these organized for you in a different one as well. So, so those are kind of pet peeves when people say that we don't have any. Evidence-based interventions is evolving. We want to think about efficacy, equity issues with what we're doing with research and what we're doing with our students. So I saw efficacy in the middle of the page, came out of my mouth, but really it's really about equity and students from a lot of diverse backgrounds. So as we evolve evidence-based interventions, are we making sure that they actually meet the needs of our students? One of the critiques of evidence-based interventions in the past is that they were normed with white populations. That's not true anymore. That's kind of an old argument. We have a lot of evidence-based interventions that have been normed on very diverse populations around the country, so that if people are arguing against evidence-based interventions or evidence-based practice, I usually just ask them, you know, what are you basing that argument on? Can you show me that research? Can you show me where this is coming from? Because that oftentimes is a decade-old argument, and we have a lot of new things that have emerged over the last 5 years. But we want to make sure that evidence-based interventions are impactful for all communities and consider all backgrounds and social contexts and histories. I mentioned special issue. The link is right there. You can get a lot of information about evidence-based interventions in the conference by reading that special issue on your own time as well. So we do, if we think about where we've evolved, we have a lot of accountability practices. ASCA's put them in there. Carolyn Stone and Carol DeHeer created the measure of student success quite a little while ago. Anita Young and Carol Kaffenberger have suggestions for a way to be accountable. We want to make sure that we know how to evolve our programs based on feedback. And then this is kind of where we are now. So if you think about evidence-based practice, you cannot think about it without the intersectionality of other contexts. So what are the ecological factors that are contributing? What are the social identity factors that are contributing? And that's the beautiful thing about evidence-based practice. If you consider it simply as what are the issues, what do we know works, and how are we evaluating, it can really serve a social justice perspective. It can really serve the perspective of how are we serving underrepresented populations? How are we closing equity gaps? How are we taking into consideration contextual factors from this site? How are we serving the students from this site? How are we personalizing things for this particular population? So it's not, doesn't need to be so rigid that you just take you take a packaged intervention out of the box and you use it without considering all these contexts. That's definitely not what we're suggesting. We're suggesting that we take into all these consideration, all these contexts, and we adjust things for the needs of the population in the context in which they live, with the history and intersectionality of all their identities. So I think that's an important evolution. This question is kind of drives the conversation for us here on out. So how do we develop evidence-based school counseling models that take into consideration the complexity and ever-changing nature of our students, school counselors, the profession, schools, and the multiple contexts and ecological systems in which we live? That's really where we're driving. So to get there, I'm really loving the transformational leadership model. And that was, again, Shields is the author that I apologize to for forgetting her name initially, but Shields, Dollarhide, and Young. One of the things that Gideon and Gretchen and I had talked about in our initial conversations was, well, how do you become a leader in the field? How do you become, and I think it's really just about finding something that you're passionate about. When I started working with evidence-based school counseling, I remember I think it was an ACEs conference in San Diego. It was quite a few years ago, but not that many years. Probably 2012, maybe. Don't quote me on the year. Nobody came to my sessions. 0 people came to my sessions. And so it's not like, you create a vision of this and then everybody jumps on board. I think that, Jay Carey and Carrie Dimmitt, they probably were having people at their sessions forever because their work is so strong, so great. But when I was working on evidence-based school counseling and how to prepare the next generation of school counselors using this approach, people were not coming to sessions. And people that were would be like 5, 6, 7 people. And then over the years, because, we just kind of kept showing how it worked and continued collaborating, probably because of the benefit of all the school counselors that were doing the amazing work, then other people started to really work together. And so it's the mobilization does not happen overnight around any issue. So as we think about the things you want to be leaders in, I would encourage you to think about what it is that you think matters for kids or for your clients and why, and how are you throwing your life into that, and how are you showing the impact of that? The other things that transformational leadership suggests, incredibly powerful. I encourage you to go to this article and read it. That part of transformational leadership addresses both the private, the individual and collective good. If I'm jumping to 4, it's deep and equitable change for the collective good of everybody. A lot of times the article mentions that when we talk about the freedom and independence of change, we're often thinking about our ability to do what we want to do instead of what is the best for the collective good. How do we create equity and justice and this emancipation, this freeing of people within systems? How do we change these systems? How do we create interconnectedness and interdependent and global awareness? And I really like 7 and 8. I kind of hope I touched on it enough at the beginning of this conversation. We have to have the moral courage to be able to have critical discussions. We do not have these critical discussions, we're not actually going to serve students the best that we can and change systems the way that they need to be changed. So I think it takes that kind of courage to have these discourses. So this quote I just really liked. You need to take account into your context, determine what changes must be made within that context to accomplish an inclusive, equitable, and socially just approach. So thinking about where we live, the context in which we live, what are steps that we need to do to create inclusivity, equitability, and social justice. And last slide before our conversation. This is just personal. Again, Gideon and Gretchen, we were talking, and then things came up about just ways that, 13 years in, like, what am I doing to accomplish the goals that I have? And I'm trying to become much more organized and purposeful about that. But I think, not me, but a lot of people will suggest starting with the end in mind and working backwards. And so, of course, I mimic that. But just dream. I think dreaming is really important. I think that understanding that life, I don't know if you knew where you were a decade ago, but I doubt you thought you'd be where you are right now. And so this first part is literally dreaming, not necessarily thinking that that's actually what's going to happen, but just thinking about possibilities, dreaming about where you might want to be. Everything's going to change anyway, so it changes every day. But what would that mean about 5 years from now? What would that mean if you were going to accomplish something a decade out? What would it mean 5 years from now? What would that mean for a year from now? And then for me, this is really where it comes into the day-to-day. I know what I want to be. I know what I want to have happen in the middle of next year. And I know what I'm doing today and next week and before December is going to directly inform what happens in the middle of next year. And so I have on the back of my office door, I have a poster board that has the list of the projects that I'm working on right now. And that is then, because every day when I walk into my office, I shut my door and I turn around and there it is. So I can't ignore it. I see it every single day. And then when it's done, when I'm working with one of my favorite things, Emily Baker is a doc student that was incredibly vital to my work last year and our work together. She's got a lot of things that she's done that has been amazing in her own right. But every time we would finish a project, she would mark it off, or I would mark it off. And just the feeling of seeing one of those projects on the back of the door be marked off was quite a reward in itself, as little as that sounds. But that drives the priorities and how I spend my time daily. And then it also is a reward, and I get to relax when I get things done. The PSC Special Edition has a list of evidence-based practice and resource areas. You can always look at these sources as well, but these are just for your, and then most references, because I know I missed some. So most of your references are here if you need them. And if not, Google Scholar is great, and I apologize for any that I missed. And there we're at questions. Thanks for listening. That's a long hour. 10 minutes of listening on your part, so.
Amazing, thank you. So, now is really our time devoted to, taking some questions, comments, reflections, or even any thoughts about how you imagine you'll incorporate some of these insights that Dr. Z offered up. I'll just open the floor here to take any reactions.
So I just have a question. So Brett, when you are working with schools, because schools usually ask for the list of practices that are evidence-based, are you able to give that to them, or do you recommend some others besides that? And then my second question is, at least here in the Northeast, our schools are driven by test scores. So it's really hard to get them to shift that paradigm and think of things in another way, because the test scores do drive our schools here in the Northeast. It's on their school report card. It's how people buy homes. It is the most important thing in our schools. I can just tell you that. I don't know about everybody else listening, but in the Northeast, it drives a great deal of things, and mental health is secondary.
Yeah, no, PJ, I appreciate that. And that is true across the country. And so let me speak to that one first, if you don't mind, and then I'll go to your first question second.
Okay.
So the beautiful thing about non-cognitives, well, okay, there's a two-pronged approach. One, I'm starting to create more, I'm starting to look at, I should say, more content around the history of education and the creation of this standardization in schools to inform my own understanding so that I can speak to it when I'm talking. So I think that's the first thing I'm doing, is trying to educate myself a little bit more about this factory model of education that we've adopted as if it's the end all be all. And then Young Zhao, Zhou, is an author at University of Oregon, and he has written books, multiple books, about how there's an inverse relationship between the increase in your international standardized test scores and the number of patents that your country files. So his argument is that there's evidence that there's an inverse relationship between the increase in standardization achievement and test scores and the creativity of your students, the creativity of your population. And so for me personally, what I have a multiple kind of approach to this. One, I am vocal in the sense that we're snuffing out the creativity of our kids. We are in middle school, creativity goes to die, you know, and I'll say that to middle school principals. And to their credit, I've never had a middle school principal say, not here. I've most middle school principals say, we know that we realize that this is where high stake testing starts getting really intense. We have a lot less time to focus on the arts and personal exploration and aspirations and all those things. And so we're trying to figure out how to change that. But in some sense, people are handcuffed by the system of standardization and trying to create, as Zhao says, Dr. Zhao says, the sausage. He says, if you take all different flavors of meat and you put them in a meat grinder to create just one flavor of sausage, that's our education system. And so if you're just grinding our kids up into one flavor, then you're going to get waste. You're going to have resistant kids. You're going to have kids that are not going to be doing well in that kind of system. And so for me, that philosophically is where I'm educating myself first. Second, in the meantime, before I become an expert in that area, since I have a little bit to go, in the meantime, what I do is I will use that system against them. And what I mean by that is if you look at Castle research, if you look at non-cognitives research, it turns out that the increases in non-cognitive skills correlates directly with achievement. And so kids that are really strong in non-cognitive skills do better on achievement. And so what I've been doing is taking research in there. There's research from the Gallup Institute that shows that hope is a greater predictor of post-secondary success than achievement or SAT or ACT scores. There's research from economists that show that non-cognitives are a better predictor of future earning level than test scores. So if we want our kids to be better earners, if we want them to make money, if that's what we say is what the market says contributes to society, or money makers, that's actually non-cognitives. So for me, it's informing them that the thing that they're using to gauge success is not actually a good indicator of it. And so that's the other message that I give them, is that this whole system that you've used, dependent on achievement, is a false system. It's just reinforcing the system. It's only reinforcing yourself. It's not actually serving your kids. And then the kids, Zhao also points out that the population that drops out of Harvard the most their junior year is an Asian American population. And he argues that they drop out their junior year because that's the year they have to choose a major. They have to really define who they're going to be. And that their life to that point has been achieving on test scores. I can take this test score, I can achieve on this test score, I can do this test score. Wait, you want me to tell you who I am and who I want to be? That I struggle with. I don't know what to do with that. I'm out. And so that's an issue. We also know, like, what, 80%, don't quote me on the particular statistic, but a very, very high percentage of students at Harvard are self-medicating prescription drugs. And so our kids are suffering because of this model. So instead of embracing it, I kind of take that two-pronged approach. First, trying to educate myself on where the model came from so I can start breaking it in some ways. And second, using the research around metacognitives and social emotional, and showing how those will actually support what these people are prioritizing, so that maybe I can shift their funding or priorities a little bit towards what's better for kids and healthier for kids, and still accomplish the outcomes that are the priorities for the district or the system, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've been doing.
Do you have, so in Zhao's book, are those Gallup polls and the non-cognitive information in his book?
Nope, but Gideon, if you write that stuff down for me, looks like Gideon's got it. I can send that out to you. That's all different research. Zhao's book is specifically about the Harvard research and about the international test scores being inversely correlated with the patents.
Okay.
So like China is #1 on the international test scores, and China really wants Steve Jobs and really wants Mark Zuckerberg and wants, all these really creative people who, by the way, went to Montessori schools, sidebar. And yet we are trying to become China. And so China's trying to become us. We're trying to become China. Who do we really want to be? We're destroying our kids to try to become a country that is standardizing their entire population. So we're on the wrong path, to be blunt.
Right. I mean, we're right in the center. Princeton is right near us, Princeton University, which much like Harvard. And I actually came from the hospital systems. I'm a licensed counselor before I worked in the school systems. And we hospitalized many of the Princeton students in secret, I want to say that, because they were just decompensating with the stress of performance. So let me just say thank you for being an advocate and having that. You have that life experience, you have that insight, so you have an incredible, powerful voice because you're able to speak to that in a way I never could. And so I hope what I give Gideon to share with you is helpful in some way to your work on that. It's really important. I find schools don't really want to hear that.
Oh, definitely not.
When you're sitting in a superintendent's roundtable, you're sitting with principals and you're trying to talk about if the kid is anxious, he can't perform, or if the kid is depressed, he can't perform. It's falling on deaf ears, I feel. I don't know if anybody else feels that way.
It is a constant struggle. And so when I go, I don't know how you prepare for those meetings, but when I go into those meetings, I tend to take the research around, how many of our students are completing suicide, and how many are, NSSI, how many have depression and anxiety. And then I talk about the research around achievement and how that isn't actually, the end all be all, and the economist research about how there's other ways for kids to be successful financially and otherwise in life. And then I try to offer a solution. So Castle has an SEL model, for whole schools to adopt. So here's a model that you could adopt in your school to increase SEL. I often ask how they're using their school counselors, and if their school counselors are doing things in a preventative way, or are they all in the urgent care emergency response approach where they're spending 80% of their time on tier 3. And so really those conversations are tough, but trying to leave them with alternatives that have research support for leading to outcomes that they still want. I'm not going to a superintendent or principal and saying the education system is totally wrong and you're screwed up for participating, because they can't change it. And so policymakers need to change it, and school districts possibly could change a little bit, but they have this competition going statewide. And so state leaders need to change it. And so when I'm at this local level, it's all about equipping them with that SEL and the non-cognitives, and get their school counseling into prevention mode. That's kind of how I go about it.
So in your position, I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing. If anybody wants to jump in, just tell me to shut up. In your position, do you have access to those policy makers? Because I feel like the policy needs to be changed. So I'm with the MHTTC. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center.
Okay.
It's through SAMHSA, and it
great.
divided the United States up into regions. So every region has one. If you go to their website, MHTTC, you'll see all the regions and who the people are. They offer a lot of free trainings. They offer those kinds of things to schools to try to get information out there and train people. They're doing a lot of SEL stuff. But again, what I find when we go into the schools, and I have that double-edged sword because I am a counselor. I've been in the schools, but I've been in the hospitals and I'm licensed. And there is such a disconnect. You know, so I'm a trauma responder. So after a suicide, my job is to go into the schools and deal with the students and the staff and the teachers. And I find that immediately after a child has killed themselves by suicide, there's this big push to bring in all these programs and do all this stuff differently. And then about 4 or 6 months out, the complaint from the line staff, the counselors and the teachers, is that everything's back to usual. So it's that factor of change, you know, so.
Yeah.
So it does need to be the policymakers. I feel like we really need to have their ear, but I don't know how to have their ear. So I was wondering if you had an ear.
I don't have their ear. I think, you know, I think we see, clearly it's tough to get policymakers' ear at any level right now. But I also hope and wonder if there was one state that MHTTC was working with that seemed open to this. I mean, all we need is really one state or one region even, you know, if that state was, I don't even know, you know, Oregon, or a state that was open to the idea that mental health prevention, social emotional learning, non-cognitives, and even I know that there's a new program that the Castle's director worked with Emory University and the Dalai Lama to create, and they just published it. I'm happy to send it out as well. We make a note.
I would love that.
It's called Social Emotional Ethics, SEE, and SEE is a program that the Dalai Lama has been working on with Emory University for quite a while, and then I think Castle's director has, you know, he's been doing social emotional learning for decades, even before they founded Castle. And everybody know what Castle stands for? I think it's the Cooperative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, sidebar. So those three entities, the director of Castle, Emory University, and the Dalai Lama is an honorary professor at Emory, have created a social emotional ethics curriculum that is incredible. I'm super excited about it. We just are looking at it. I'm hoping that we can start supporting it in some way. But I'm wondering if, you know, that is if there's a region or state or somebody that would get behind looking at SEE in a way that it builds on the research that I mentioned around non-cognitives and social emotional learning. Actually, PJ, you'll love it because there's a lot, if you look closely at it, there's a lot of clinical mental health counseling in there. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of even like crisis response stuff, but being aware of your body, being able to feel the emotions, being able to be in touch with those. Like there's a lot of the things that like neurosensory and stuff like that are using right now. So when I send that out to you, if you look real closely at the pieces, and there's a beautiful model visual, but if you break it down, you're going to see a lot of things that you love, that you already do. And so I think that's a pathway forward. We might be able to, if they start creating some momentum, the Dalai Lama is doing it with like 700 schools in Tibet, but if there's some sort of momentum that gets created around Emory University or around Atlanta or around some region that's like, yeah, we'll try that out. I think that's a way to connect that with the success of students, maybe the reduction in self-harm, non-suicidal self-injuries, mental health issues of the kids that are involved in that program. Then maybe we can start making inroads in another way too.
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like, and you know, again, I feel like the teachers need some social emotional learning.
Totally. And actually that's part of the Castle system is the teachers. And we're working with adverse childhood experiences. And there's a program called Building Better Lives. And it's I'd have to tell you the link. It's off Bruce Perry's work, the neurosequential model with Bruce Perry. So it builds off of Bruce Perry's work, but the whole focus of Building Better Lives is entirely teacher and adult focus in the schools. And so it's all about equipping these teachers who themselves have experienced trauma in their life, start getting the skills to be able to self-regulate and manage themselves and not escalate situations and not take things personally, and understand what thing happens with the brain when kids are reacting with trauma.
And what's that program called?
So there's two you might want to look at. Bruce Perry is the author of the original ACEs study, one of the authors back in 1998, and they've created a program called the neurosequential model. And off of that, neurosequential model, off of that, which you'll be able to find online, and he's written a book,
okay,
and all sorts of great things. They have a great website and everything. Off of that is the Building Better Lives initiatives, and it's not really published out yet. They're looking to do some research into it, but it's called BBL, so Building Better Lives. And that's literally local here. Our Franklin County Family and Children First Council, FCFC. So Franklin County Family and Children First, acronyms. They've done incredible work with our local schools. Columbus City Schools is, I think, the largest school district in Ohio, and it has 100% free and reduced lunch. And Columbus City has been working with Franklin County Family and Children First Council to implement Building Better Lives and help with their schools. So that is a promising practice with teachers as the main focus.
okay.
And to answer your first question, I usually do not give the schools the entire evidence-based list. I usually ask them, how do they know the needs of their students? What data do they have around the needs of their students? And then when they show me that data and they talk about the needs of their students, not their opinions, but they show me the actual data. So that first step is in empowering them to start data collection and different types of data collection, and then being able to analyze and look at that data. And after that step, then we'll say, all right, well, what do you need if you have a bunch of kids that are feeling like they're not safe at school, or do we need what types of programming do we need to meet the needs of your kids? And then let's match that with what we know works, so that we're not just taking a menu of programs and just being like, we're going to try 4 of these, and not really do
the flavor of the food.
Yeah, and we're not going to do any of them with fidelity. We're just going to mishmash them across and hope that something sticks. And so we try to avoid that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's that
So
train and train model.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in here because I think one of the best things about managing time in these is someone always has to jump in and say we got to scoot at some point. But I just want to name that I think between the insight and being the conduit for pointing to these amazing resources. Both Gretchen and I have been capturing these, and we'll include them in a show notes section as a follow-up for you all, so you have access to these pieces. But knowing that we have to close soon, I'll just invite 1 or 2 more reflections or comments before we scoot.
I had a question that I can follow up later with you via email, but I'm just in a position now where I'm ready and excited to do research and contribute to the field, and my area of specialty is college and career readiness. But I find that I'm in this position of I don't know, I have all these projects going on and I don't know how to make sure that I'm doing good research. And I think when you described, you should have taken more research classes or stats classes during your doc program, that's me as well. And yeah, my doc program was not super helpful in preparing me. So I find that I'm excited to do this work and interested in research and ready to dig in, but I'm I don't know where to start. So I'm just wondering if you have any recommendations on any books to read or people to talk to, or where to start really.
Sure. One, I think, as you just mentioned, we're all in that place. So one, I think that there are a lot of people out there that want to work with you, and you don't know that yet. And so I think maybe that can be encouraging too. I don't ever do anything alone. And so have you been to evidence-based yet?
Yeah, the last 2 years I've gone, and I go to the research days.
And you've been to research days too?
Yep.
Okay. So at the beginning of this next research day, are you going to Florida?
Yes.
All right. At the beginning of that day, pull me aside, and we will connect. We will figure out who else is doing college and career work, and we will create. And we can even create that strand right then in research day, because as a result, the whole point of research day is for you to come out with your people.
Okay.
You know, that's the whole point. So if you're going through 2 research days and you're not finding your people, that's a failure on my part. So for reals. So I want that to be the goal for this research day for you, is when you get out of that research day, you're leaving with the network of people who are doing college and career research. And there are people doing that. And Carrie, if you were talking to Carrie Dimmer right now, she would be naming them off the top of her head.
Okay.
that much knowledge. But email me directly too after this. And there's Carolyn up in Minnesota is doing that work, and so we can connect you with her. And then there are a lot there. This is definitely an area that people like, I mean, George McMahon at Georgia is looking at it, and Laura Owen at American University.
Laura. Yeah.
Okay, good. So Laura would be a person to connect with. And then we can also, you and I, outside this conversation, we can look at your research pieces and talk about how to scaffold that.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most difficult things for me was how do I create a research agenda? And again, that selfishly is what the research day is supposed to address. For me, too, was like, I want to listen to Matthew Lemberger this year is going to be the keynote for research day. And his whole point is to tell us how to do that.
Okay. Cool.
So the keynotes of research day are supposed to tell us how to create research agendas. And that's the message. So if you start the day, you get the keynote around how to build a research agenda. Then you go to methodologies that should support your work. Then you have networking with people that are doing the work that you want to do. So you leave feeling like you have an understanding of how to build a research agenda. You have people that you connect to that are experts in the methodologies that you need so that you can get further PD with them, or they can direct you to what books to learn and things like that. And then you leave networked. That's kind of the whole philosophy of research day. And so if that hasn't been happening for you, that's really good feedback for me, because that means we need to be more intentional about what we're doing with research day.
And I was probably I was a doc student at the time, the last 2 years. So had my mind focused on different things. So don't take that away from it was still a really good experience.
Great. No, but it's all, like I said earlier, it's all grist for the mill, and that the research day is really literally created to answer these questions that you've asked.
Okay.
And so that's one of the things we want to give to the profession is provide you with the support and the direction and the efficacy and the network to empower you to do the work you want to do. So
awesome. All right, thank you.
Talk later for sure.
Yeah, great, thank you.
But
amazing. It was fun to watch happen. Gretchen, I'll tell you this, Gretchen and I were messaging like, this is cool to watch happen, because this is what we're here for, to incubate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So I will just wrap up here. Dr. Z, do you want to share any last words before I just close us out?
I think that I really appreciate, PJ and Beth bringing up these issues. I mean, both of them take a little bit of courage. Beth to be transparent and honest with those things takes courage. And then PJ talking about taking on systems to change them for the betterment of our kids, especially when they're so embedded in this achievement kind of doctrine. And so thank you for doing that work, and thanks for giving me the time here. I really appreciate it. I know that there's an empowerment in knowing that there are people that are interested in helping kids, whether we're clinical mental health counselors, whether we're school counselors. Your work with adults trickles to kids. Adults have been kids. I don't know if you noticed that. And so knowing what works with kids usually informs what we're doing with adults as well. So it's been a real privilege to talk to you all, and I really appreciate everything each of you is doing to help your clients and your students. I hope something was at least a spark or encouraging so that you can continue that work, because it's really all of us kind of those little streams that create the big change. So thanks for that.
On behalf of the group, Dr. Z, I'll just take the liberty of speaking of everyone, just expressing our deep gratitude for taking your Saturday and just sharing all of this. I'm sure you've caused reverberations and you receive a lot of emails going forward. So I'll just throw out there for folks who may be interested in future CRL webinars. We have 3 more webinars now through the end of December. 2 webinars, it's going to be a twofer. It's going to be looking at corpus linguistics. So part 1 will be an introductory to the methodology of corpus linguistics. Part 2 will be more of an application and a sort of in-depth look into it. And then we have a 3rd webinar that's looking at international leadership development using experiential learning practices. So if any of those fit your fancy, feel free to check those out on our website. But Dr. Z, I imagine we'll be asking you back at some point, because 90 minutes is not enough to capture all of the good work that's done. But thank you all for today. Hope you have a good Saturday, and welcome to November. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
All right.
Thank you very
Thank you all.
much.
Bye.